I'm not completely sure how this book got to be written. Anyway, it reflects a whole number of arguments with quite a lot of people, in particular between Torben and myself, over a long period of time, and I guess that we really started to write it seriously when it became clear that the systems of advanced capitalism, I might say, have become politically under attack from populism, but also under attack from the left. And both democracy and the autonomy of advanced nation states have been seen by many critics as undermined by footloose capitalism. I'm particularly aware of Wolfgang Streeck and his dazzling criticisms of the way the world is going. It's also true objectively that the advanced economies, as well as the rest of the world, has been in a mess from a whole decade of very slow growth of real wages and productivity. And while both Torben and I have written a great deal about the problems of advanced capitalism, we take in this book a longer-term perspective, in part to counter what we see as sort of systemic pessimism. I think we did quite a lot of work on the 1930s, and I think we were quite moved by the degree of attack from the left, which made it very difficult for social democratic parties to develop coherent positions, made it difficult for the left to combine, into thinking that one needed to be to think a bit about what was, perhaps from a longer term perspective, the need to actually understand how advanced capitalist democracies were working. And I guess the basic issue, the basic question became, is advanced capitalism consistent with democracy and autonomous advanced nation states? That seems to have become a question which people have been posing, and what we want to do is not so much focus on the present, though I'm very clear that the present will come up massively in any discussion, but to go back over a 100-year period to try and see if we can get a broader picture of how these debates have developed. And if you do go back over a longer term picture of the debates about advanced capitalism, almost all the leading theorists of advanced capitalism that we've read have been pessimistic about it in one form or another. Clearly in the Marxist tradition, it leads to revolution, and not only Marx and Engels, but also the leading intellectuals of German social democracy in the 20s and 30s, Kautsky and Hilferding, both agreed with that analysis. They agreed with that analysis against Bernstein. If you look at Hayek and Schumpeter, they too believed that democracy was inconsistent with effective advanced capitalism. They believed either that that socialism would win elections, or that there would be a descent into Austrian-type corporatism. And then if you look at more modern Marxists, they, almost all, that's to say, even Poulantzas and Miliband, and think of that as a combination, agreed that advanced capitalism, in one form or another, controls the system, as in different ways did Althus and Lindblom, who in some sense is the most interesting and sophisticated to a lot of these theorists. And then today, if we take Streeck and de facto Piketty, this type of analysis argues that footloose capitalism, in one form or other, undercuts the autonomy of the advanced nation state and democracy. And if you really read these things, you'll know that Lapavitsas argues that this is reinforced by financialization. And there's another type of criticism which comes originally from Wolfgang. Wolfgang wrote an article, A Pluribus Unum, out of the varieties of capitalism, only one would survive, and that was an American form of race to the bottom capitalism. Specialization and institutional variation are wiped out in his approach. Indeed, he doesn't take this as far as looking at innovation, but that's the implication of his argument. There are very few people actually or very few sort of leading theorists of advanced capitalism. I would say Bernstein, obviously, Crossland, and Keynes himself are really the only three sophisticated leading theorists. Whether Keynes would have thought of himself as a leading theorist of advanced capitalism, advanced capitalist democracy, I'm not sure, who made a coherent and positive statement. And I guess one reason, I have to get some water. One academic reason for writing this, and I have to say, to some extent, pushed by Wolfgang or teased by Wolfgang into doing, is actually that here we've been focusing just on varieties of capitalism and how individual countries differed. Why weren't we actually analyzing how advanced capitalism itself worked as a system or a way of looking at things? So that was sort of an intellectual background, and it's very clear once you once you start looking at the history and figures and data and so on, that it's important to pose this question simply because advanced capitalism, at least advanced capitalism embedded in advanced states, and I'll talk a lot more about advanced capitalism being embedded in advanced states and not being free-floating. It's important to pose the question, since advanced capitalism has been responsible, because of its capacity to innovate, for this vast rise in living standards over a 150, 200-year period. And that is also relatively egalitarian in comparison to any other durable political economic system, and in part because advanced capitalist democracies have comparatively been very powerful redistributors of income. So there are strong reasons for looking to try and develop a more positive theory of how advanced capitalist systems work, if one takes into account how basically successful, relatively speaking, they've been in the past over a long period of time, compared to any other such system. Then when we started looking at the data, we noticed one other major fact, which seems not to really have gained a huge amount of attention, indeed, if any at all, and that's the remarkable durability of advanced capitalist democracies. So if you go back to just after the end of the First World War, all the nation states, all the advanced states which had industrialized during the 19th century or the early 20th century had become democracies. They'd become democracies then, and if you carry right the way forward to 100 years after, the title is a turbulent century, they're still all advanced capitalist democracies. So that's for a political economic form. There are very few political economic forms which have survived for as long as that. And what's rather remarkable is here you have all the major theorists of advanced capitalist democracies saying they can't last. And yet, all the ones, with one exception, which had industrialized before and had democratized just after the First World War, with one exception of Czechoslovakia, they're all still advanced capitalist democracies. If for any Czechs in the audience, I don't at all mean to say anything disparaging by saying it's not an advanced capitalist democracy today, but it went through a slightly troubled period and indeed then split up into two parts. In any case, what seems a really remarkable fact to explain is, how is it that this system of advanced capitalist democracies in advanced states has remained so durable during arguably the most turbulent century in recorded history probably since the 5th century. It's based on some serious conversations with historians of the period. Yes, that the 5th century looks just about on a par with the period from 1920 to 2020. If you think about that period, world wars, the rise and fall of the communist system, decolonialization and the end of empire, massive social, educational change, and changes in economic organization, and above all, great technological regime changes with financial crises, prolonged recessions, and so on. So this is a hugely turbulent century, and yet advanced capitalist democracies have survived through that, and compared to any other system, have done extraordinarily well in terms of what they produce. Now, let me just say, most of my, or a large chunk of my career has been working in a pretty critical way on a whole lot of advanced capitalist democracies. So this is not meant, this shouldn't come through as a celebratory book. This is our one problem, that people would look at this and think, do these guys work for Wall Street or something? Can I just say, knowing those sort of notes which come at the end of all scientific articles, the authors have no financial interest in any institutions which may benefit from blah, 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 blah. So, the second point I want to, so that's the first point I really want to make, and I'm going to make a number of points which I will number just to keep my mind in sync. The second point, and very basic point, is it's extraordinary because advanced capitalist systems are inherently unstable. And they're unstable because they actually operate through great waves of innovatory discoveries, great technological regime changes are what's been the underlying propulsion which has pushed up living standards in these countries over the last century or more. And those major waves which have close connections to the theory of long waves in very long cycles, Kondratiev and so on, explained by Chris Freeman, Perez, Dozy, and so on, bear very quickly mentioning. We first of all had the Industrial Revolution proper, which is really the first half of the 19th century, is really steam and iron, and then the so-called Scientific Revolution, development of electromechanical machinery, development of chemicals, the early development of pharmaceuticals. And then Fordism, which one can think of as an organizational revolution, oil, age of cars and suburbs, and then the information revolution. So four absolutely huge technological regime changes, each associated with their so-called general purpose technology, the steam and iron in the first place, electricity in the case of the scientific revolution, the assembly line and the internal combustion engine associated with Fordism, and finally computers and the internet associated with the information revolution. And each of those general purpose technologies are called general purpose technologies by innovation theorists because they apply right across, or very largely across, all the activities, social activities and economic activities of these societies. So just as these big cycles, these big regime changes had destabilizing effects in many ways, they particularly had destabilizing social effects because they affected right through advanced societies. And there's some very interesting common features of these cyclical waves of instability. Anatol Koletsky has argued that one of the things which happens in each of these technological waves is that financial systems change. And financial systems change largely because of the huge uncertainties which you somehow have to finance when technologies change in a major way. So he argues that it's not an accidental thing that with each of these waves there has been a major financial crash, 1873, 1929, and then 2008. And with each financial crash, there's been associated a long period of very slow growth or basically prolonged recession. So the so-called 19th century climacteric in the last 15 years or so, the last 20 years or so of the 19th century, the Great Depression in the 1930s, and now this so-called Great Recession from 2008, from which some people argue we are recovering, but if we come on to this, I would argue that's a very optimistic assumption. So with that, in each of these cases associated with each of these technological changes, you have had a major political reaction which has taken the form in one way or another of what we would today call populism. So you have, as it were, you have advanced capitalist systems over this long time, remaining in place, durable, but at the same time going through these great changes. So the question really is, how do we think about why they are so durable, or to use a modern word which is apparently very in vogue for research grant applications, why are they so resilient? First of all, two empirical foundations, or two basic empirical facts, which are of importance in thinking about advanced capitalist democracies or advanced capitalist systems. The first is that advanced capitalist companies are everywhere associated with skilled workforces. This is an empirical fact. It obviously doesn't need to be the case, but it's always been the case, apart from in the very early age of development of textile machinery in the first half of the 19th century. So capitalism has always required, advanced capitalism has always required highly skilled workforces. Those skills have tied workers into companies and have tied companies into their skilled workforces. And that's because a lot of these skills are not so-called codifiable skills, which can be put into patents or blueprints or whatever and then carried around from country to country. They depend a lot on tacit skills and co-specific skills. So tacit skills, which mean that you actually have to learn these skills, and they take the more you do, the more tied into the technology of the company you get, the more you get tied into the rest of the workforce. So these advanced companies operate within embedded social networks, which have all sorts of modern terminology like skill clusters and so on. And this has always tied down the geographical base of advanced companies. And that I want to argue is a very critical fact. The second empirical foundation is advanced capitalism just works within advanced capitalist countries. It doesn't work advanced states. It doesn't work with very rare exceptions, in less advanced states. So one can very much think in terms not just of advanced capitalist systems being the way in which these developments get pushed forward of innovation and so on, but actually advanced capitalist systems in conjunction with advanced states. So the role of the state in actually pushing forward advanced capitalism has become clearer and clearer. Mariana Mazzucato's work or Fred Bloch's work have shown how this have shown this, but we should think not so much of advanced capitalist systems by themselves, but as advanced capitalist systems embedded in advanced states. Now let me get on to the four core arguments. How long should I go on till? Good, okay. Let me get on to the four core arguments about advanced capitalist systems, which really answer the question, what produce advanced capitalist systems and what maintain and reinforce them. And the first point to make is the necessary condition for advanced capitalist systems is a strong national government or strong state systems. Strong national governments, strong governance, strong legal systems, and a system which already has strong technological capabilities, or in the case of some of the recent countries like South Korea and Singapore, has the capacity or the means to build them up. And the reason for strong national states is first, and this is, I think, accepted by most people, you have to impose, the state has to impose competition on advanced companies in order to generate innovation, as Philippe Aghion has pointed out, not too much competition, but enough competition. And if you don't do it, or countering that, if you like, the temptation, as in Latin America, is to do a Latin American deal with domestic grupos, trading de facto monopolies for a share of profit. So that would be a standard public choice type reaction to where politicians should go if they can do it. Offer companies freedom from competition legislation, and then share the profits which they get from being able to put up prices. That is a very standard analysis of why Latin America, with all its advantages, has found it very difficult to become advanced. The second requirement of the state is it needs to develop labor market rules which either give managers the right to manage, to impose new technology and so on, or to ensure that skilled workers don't hold up management after the sunk costs of innovation-intensive investments. So governments have got to also structure the labor market so as to prevent unions or wherever undercutting the ability of management to invest. And the temptation, as it was, is from Poulantzas, the temptation for left governments to trade votes for overstrong pro-union legislation is an illustration of how this goes wrong. There is also what one might describe as a no-slavery condition. That's to say, the government has to ensure that the labor legislation isn't so one-sided in enabling companies, advanced companies, to make investments in innovation, it has to also ensure that skilled workers can actually benefit themselves from the legislation. So that's the third point. The fourth point is a very straightforward point. You need a strong government to maintain and develop the infrastructure for education, training, and research, and to promote the national and regional institutions beneficial to innovation in the nation or region in question. And the temptation there is to spend money elsewhere or to cut taxes. And this temptation obviously is strong if capital is footloose, or could take skilled labor and technology with it to other cheaper destinations. Fifthly, governments need to work to develop responses to changing technologies. That's to say, what happens when IT technology develops, then what is it that governments need to do? They need to work out what their responses are to that. And the temptation, by converse temptation, is to support established interests who could be damaged by new challenges. So one of the interesting illustrations of this is how Thatcher pushed through her reforms at a time to make IT technology and innovation easier, at a time when there was really bitter opposition from British business to doing the type of market reforms she wanted to do. So if there are all these so you need to have strong governments to do these things, but strong governments have real temptation, even if they can do them, to go in opposite directions, to do deals with, cozy deals with business, crony capitalism or whatever. We have two major arguments at this point. The first major argument is that, and this is where the symbiosis between democracy and capitalism comes in, we argue that democracy has actually been a necessary condition, once advanced capitalism gets going, has been a necessary condition for pushing governments to carry out these type of reforms, despite the temptation which a strong government may have not to do so. So how does democracy come into it? What we argue is there are large constituencies which have an interest in the advanced sectors of economies. Most obviously employees, because they can bargain for their cooperation and benefit. They have tacit and co-specific skills, as I've said. So existing skilled employees benefit greatly from the advanced sectors of the economy doing well. They constitute a major constituency. A second constituency is, and this strikes me as a very important point, and it's something which is really neglected in the political science literature, is the role of aspirational families in advanced capitalism. So, aspirational families want advanced capitalist sectors to be successful because these are the sectors which create employment for them or for their children. This is the way in which you generate, in inverted commas, good jobs. And the beneficiaries, the aspirational families, are middle class or low middle class or established working classes, times different groups at different times. But the role of families wanting to get good jobs for their children, and therefore in order to get good jobs for their children, pushing their children into education and acting as a booster to the education system, as well as pushing the government to act in the interests of advanced capitalism, advanced sectors, seems to me to be a super important element of the way in which the dynamics of advanced capitalism work. If one goes to an important book by Goldin and Katz, Claudia Goldin and Larry Katz, to Harvard economists who asked the question, so what is the dynamic of advanced capitalism? What is it which makes it work for more and more young people to go to college and to benefit from that? And they argue there is a dynamic which goes from innovation, which increases the returns to skills, and the returns to skills increases the incentive for more young people to go to university, which increases, in that case, increases the amount of innovation and so on and so forth. So they argue for in this very important book in the sort of political economy literature, they argue for a dynamic which goes from innovation in the advanced sector, pushing aspirational families to send their children to get more educated, the greater education, then boosting innovation, that in turn boosting rates of return, and so on. So you have a dynamic there which sets up a dynamic system of continuing improvement and innovation in the economy. So, if one's interested by how advanced capitalism works, you can see that there is an inherent need for this dynamic of improvement, just at the same time as these looming cycles of instability imposed by technological change may break things up as they've broken things up at the moment. So this points to something which we don't really talk about very much in political economy, but the centrality of the family, and particularly the aspirational family, in pushing the development of advanced capitalism and in promoting their children and their families as a result of this. So this is a middle class beneficiary, which leaves the lower groups in society potentially stranded, and is nonetheless it seems to me of great importance to understand how the system works. And this may speak to an implicit psychological connection between this connection in families and education, may speak to an implicit psychological connection to the nation state, which comes from Arlie Hochschild's marvelous book, Strangers in Their Own Land, points to the importance of the American dream as being a psychological construct which gives people, again, these aspirational families who are pushing onwards and upwards, the incentive to be part of this and to feel completely let down when the system stops working. She has a metaphor of people on an escalator going up. Now, these different groups may vote for different parties. There isn't a party of advanced capitalism, but they only vote for parties or for their leaders who have a reputation for capable management of advanced economy. So we have a powerful set of mechanisms in which there are constituencies who want governments to be seen as being competent in terms of the economic management of modern economies. And we see that as a very powerful, that means that in order to get elected, to be electable, you have as a party to be able to show your economic competence, and as political leaders to show their economic competence, something which I come from a country, which is an island off the west coast of the continent of Europe, called the United Kingdom, and it acts as a primary example of a political system which has manifestly failed in everything, but in particular it's failed in showing any competence for economic management. So this may well be the last time reading the latest of Barnier's pronouncements about what needs to be done in the next 10 days or so. This may be the last time I'm in the continent of Europe without a visa. So it's very nice to be here, and I'm really sorry about the British government. I don't know what, never been as chaotic as this, but then there we are. So this then goes on to the second critical point about advanced capitalism, which is you might expect that advanced capitalist companies would move to get better deals elsewhere, or would, as Lindblom thought a long time ago, engage in investment strikes against the government if the government didn't behave in the right way. We argue, on the contrary, that advanced capitalism is politically weak. And it's politically weak for two reasons. First, that advanced companies are not footloose. They're not footloose because their value added depends on the value of their workforces, their skilled workforces. And their skilled workforces are very much embedded geographically. It's very difficult even to move 10 people from the City of London to Zurich. There was a famous article in the Financial Times about this 2 years ago, before we'd actually thought about leaving Europe. This American hedge fund manager wanted to move his team of 10 people from London to Zurich. But those 10 people they were totally socially embedded in London. They had all their connections in London. They depended on their friends being able to tell them about new jobs, to raise their bargaining power in relation to this hedge fund manager. So after doing a big article for the Financial Times, the hedge fund manager then saying they were all going to leave and go to Zurich, he then tried to get them to go, and I think only 3 of them did go, and then he had to come back, and then there was another article shortly after that, sort of explaining in the Financial Times that these are people who are not mobile. So the first point is that the idea that advanced capitalist companies are footloose is not the case. Advanced capitalist companies certainly set up subsidiaries all over the place, but once they've set up the subsidiaries, they set up the subsidiaries to tap into knowledge resources in the advanced economies. And then what ties them there is the value of the workforce which they've tapped into and invested in. So on the one hand, multinationals are have very wide nets of knowledge-based subsidiaries. On the other hand, it's very difficult for them to move once they've set up in a place. The second point is it's very difficult for advanced capitalist companies to get together, to collude, to take action against governments, because they're typically competing against each other, so that the type of arguments which Lindblom was making simply don't seem to stack up in the world of competitive advanced capitalism. So our conclusion is advanced capitalism can't undercut this situation, can't undercut the autonomy of a government. And before that, voters will put pressure on governments to adopt the right type of policies. Finally, I want to make two final points. The first thing which characterizes these systems is that is the importance of specialization in advanced capitalism. These companies are not producing the same thing. They're producing a whole range of different goods, and that's very closely bound up with the whole notion of innovation. So these are advanced companies which specialize in different types of goods and different types of services. That in turn depends, I'm now slightly coming back to varieties of capitalism, that in turn depends on the institutional variety of these different advanced systems. So these systems are embedded in countries with a lot of institutional variation, and they specialize in different markets, developing different products, developing different services. Now just a short word about how globalization comes into this. And I'll talk about how globalization has been working over the last 30 or 40 years, which has been through a big expansion of the role of multinationals. Multinationals didn't have such an important role in the advanced world before the 1980s and the early 1990s. And since then, here's how a multinational works. So Unilever would be a good example of this. Unilever has a headquarters and a headquarters function which is really about producing new products, branding them, and marketing them across the advanced world to high-level wealthy markets. And what Unilever will be doing with its scientists in the headquarters is working with a whole series of different knowledge-based groups, so-called skill clustered, around the advanced world, actually largely around Europe, and to some extent, including England. So when they're developing a new product, they will know what type of technologies they need to tap into. They're in the advanced world, and they set up knowledge-based subsidiaries in order to do that. So these modern multinationals will be like spiders' webs of knowledge-based subsidiaries, all putting knowledge into the building of new products, and then the multinational will also be having this other function of branding, marketing, and pushing these goods out or services out typically across the advanced world. So we have a world now where multinationals play actually a pretty different role to the role which they played in the past, but it's a role which totally underwrites the importance of specialization in modern capitalist economies, modern advanced capitalist economies. Then one asks the question, why the autonomy of nation states? And the answer which one comes up with is not a sort of standard IR answer. It's that advanced governments need to make sure that their multinationals in particular have got good access to all the other advanced economies. That's part of the reason why Trump is causing a lot of chaos and a lot of concern. Hence, we have a system which reinforces the autonomy of these advanced capitalist systems, because there needs to be a degree of mutual respect. So, very finally, we can ask the question, why do we have, if these are democracies, these advanced systems of democracies, why don't we have more redistributive compensation than we do, or at least than we've seen in the recent past? And part of the problem of a democracy is that democracy is not very perfect, because the decisive voters in democracy, on the one hand, who are pushing the advanced capitalist systems, themselves have their own views about redistribution. So we move away from an old view of a left-right spectrum, and the view that when inequality rises, voters vote for redistributive measures, to a view which says maybe, but not always the case. There are going to be a lot of people who lose out from this, even though we're in a completely democratic society. Okay, so it's 6 o'clock, so I'll stop at that point.